Hello, my friend Alicia Lynn Diaz here, transformational healer and creator of the Enlightened Body System. Welcome to this super inspiring interview with my friend Jennifer Taviv, also known as Ellie Sheva. In this interview, we are going to listen and learn from her incredible healing story from healing from blindness. And in this interview, we have part one and part two, and you will learn how to start to discern some of the overwhelming advice and information that comes into your world when you are given an intense medical diagnosis. So, how to cut through that chaos. We're going to go into how to trust your intuition and follow your intuition. Jennifer talks a lot about how to manage the emotional roller coaster of dealing with a healing crisis and how to discern things that are going to help you and things that you need to powerfully say no to. Jennifer is going to share the miraculous and light enlightening experience that she had when she was able to see herself in the mirror for the first time after being blind. And this was one of the most moving parts of our entire interview together. I think you'll really, really appreciate that. And it is a very healing perspective that she has. In part two of the interview, we're going to dive deeper into her personal practices, tools, and tips and perspectives that you can use right away, tapping into feminine wisdom, awakening spiritual connectedness, her personal practices for relating to her body during a healing crisis, as well as personal practices and her personal revelations around relating to physical pain itself, and of course, tying in the mental, emotional, spiritual aspects of this entire healing journey. So without further ado, here's my interview with Jennifer. Enjoy.
Jennifer has this amazing healing story about how she healed herself from something that most people and most Western doctors will say is incurable, unhealable. And many of you who might be listening to this might be on a path that is struggling and challenging and makes you wonder what's going to work, if anything's going to work. And I feel like your story, Jennifer, was one that was really, really inspiring. So I would love to just start with, what was kind of the overarch of that experience, that journey? What was really going on for you? And what are some of the steps that you took to resolve that?
Sure. Yeah, it is a crazy story. I definitely want to start by saying that I did not heal myself. There's no way that I can take all the credit for that. I have an amazing team of healers around me. And a lot of the journey of getting better was about realizing that I had to build a kind of a tribe for myself, a sort of healing tribe, and bring people on board and enroll them in the, hey, we're going to do the impossible now and get me better. And so it is an amazing tribe of physicians and surgeons and, functional medicine practitioners and shamans and therapists, like just everybody who got on board with my healing journey. So I want to start there with, one of the sorry, I have a dog in the background, part of my healing. Come here, girl. One of the, oh, I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. Okay. But yeah, so there were a lot of people involved in the healing journey. And one of the most, I think, important lessons that I learned, important and hardest, one of the hardest lessons to learn was actually that I cannot do it myself. And so more than I didn't heal myself and I brought all these other people aboard, was that I learned that I cannot do it myself and I could not do it myself. And letting go of that idea, I look back and think, certainly in dealing with the illness and then in dealing with being blind, which was like just totally a journey of complete surrender, and that I cannot be an island unto myself psychologically or even practically speaking. That was such an important lesson, and part of my healing was learning how to ask for help and learning how to invite people in, and learning how to talk about what my needs were. So I think, like, even being here today and talking with you is like, yeah, this would not have happened 10 years ago. Like, no.
Yeah.
So So what is my story? So I'll give like a really sort of broad picture overview of the actual health view. I was 2 weeks out from delivering my second daughter. I have two awesome daughters. And I was 2 weeks out from delivering my youngest, and I started to have visual issues. I started to have like fireworks in my eyes and pain and like weird headaches and stuff like that. Now, I had just gone through a really exhausting pregnancy and birth. I had a hyperemesis, so I was sick my entire pregnancy with both my pregnancies, and I was also breastfeeding in the beginning of that pregnancy. So I was like physically and nutritionally drained for a long period of time.
Wow.
And I gave birth. It was it was an amazing birth. I had an amazing team of midwives and healers. I was also I made an all women environment. So it was an amazing birth, but it was a pretty traumatic one. I had my placenta detached and I hemorrhaged. So I was in recovery from that. And my daughter was also in recovery with me. She had failed her APGAR scores and she had to be resuscitated at birth. So there was this, these few days and few weeks after I'd given birth, and I decided to do the sleep-in approach, sort of the John Lennon, Yoko Ono style of parenting, where I just went home. I actually went home early. I left the hospital early. Hospitals are not places to get well, as far as I'm concerned. And I had me and my newborn daughter and my older daughter, who was 3 at the time. And I said, okay, we're all just going to like be as naked as possible and be in this bed as much as possible, skin to skin and cuddling. And we did that. And so we were doing that. And I think it was really great for me and for my daughter, but I started to lose my vision during this time. So at some point, it got scary enough that I, turned to my husband at the time and said, I think that we need to go to the ER. Like, I think I'd never had any issues with my eyes. I had issues, but not anything acute. And we went to the ER, and we were living in South Florida at the time. So this wasn't a university hospital, right? It was just like a small kind of rural area. And I went in and they did the eye exam, and, some like 27-year-old eye doctor was like, no, you're fine. There's nothing wrong. And I'm like, if that had been the last time that I heard that, it would have been enough, but it was not, of course, the last time that I heard that, as anyone who's been on a chronic health journey knows. And I was like, no, I'm not fine. Something's going on. But they discharged me and they sent me home, and they told me that I was fine, and they didn't run any tests. And it was a couple of more weeks before I got in front of someone who did know what was going on. And I was diagnosed with a really rare disease of the retina that is an autoimmune disease. So it's a disease where the immune system attacks the retinas in particular. And it was pretty aggressive. And within a matter of weeks, I had developed enough scar tissue that my pupils stopped dilating. I stopped being able to tolerate bright lights. And before the end of that month, I stopped being able to drive. I couldn't see, the colors change on the lights anymore. And I was really rapidly losing my vision at that point. And what they did to me, what they do to pretty much anyone who walks into a medical facility with an acute chronic inflammatory issue, which is that they threw prednisone at me. So I was on a ton of prednisone. I think I was on 60 milligrams. And I was taking ocular prednisone. They were just throwing the kitchen sink at me. And I was still trying to recover from my birth. So I was I think about 120 pounds over my ideal weight, my normal body weight. And I was breastfeeding. And I was now obviously in enormous panic and stress because I was rapidly losing my vision and was the caretaker for 2 little kids at that time. So it was really, it was really rough. It was really anxiety provoking. And it became really clear that we needed to, I'm from New York City, I'm from Manhattan. And it became really clear that we needed to move back to Manhattan, and that we needed to go, that we understood quickly that there were very few specialists in this condition in the United States, and that all of them were in the Northeast. Mm-hmm. So we packed everything up and we came back to New York. Wow. It was I am fast forwarding through a journey that I bet all your listeners can relate to, right? Like months and months of seeing this doctor and that doctor, being given this medication and that medication, those medications wreaking complete havoc on me physically and mentally, and being financially draining and psychologically draining, and taking a real toll on our lives. And then one night the pain was so bad that I ended up in the New York Eye and Ear ER downtown, which is thankfully New York City has emergency rooms for the eye, which is a rare thing in more rural places. And we went, and I ended up in the care of the head of the hospital, because by luck he had pulled the short straw and had to be the attending in the ER. Which is like, it was his bad luck was my great fortune on that night. And I'm really grateful that I met that team. And so I started under his care. And while I was at that point going in every day, and they were injecting steroids directly into the back of my eye, into my retina. And I was having those injections daily. And then they moved to weekly capsules, where they were injecting capsules into the back of my eye. And I was in pain, and I was, at this point, functionally blind, no longer able to push a stroller down the street, certainly not able to drive or anything like that. So it was real crisis mode of trying to save my vision. And at the same time, I was physically ill. I was constantly I had abdominal pain that landed me in an ER a few times, that they sort of, maybe it was my gallbladder, that sort of thing. And I was just aching and in pain and deeply, deeply depressed. And they were just throwing everything at me. So they first did the prednisone, and then they did different forms of chemotherapy, different forms of immune suppressants, different types of biologics, at the same time as they were injecting steroids. So it was harrowing. It was exhausting. It was demoralizing, but it was also in those rooms that the first time they had a resident in the room one day while they were doing the injection in my eye. And he was just leaning over. Because I have such a rare disease, everybody always wanted to see what was going on, which was kind of nice. It was nice to be like the most popular patient. And so he wanted to come in and have a look, and he has a look. And then he leans back and he looks at me and he says, this is a really, really, really rare side effect of a gluten allergy. Do you happen to be allergic to gluten? Have you ever been tested for celiac disease? And that was, I was at that point eating, just, garbage, grilled cheese, and I was pregnant. So when you're pregnant, you're like, whatever I don't throw up, I will eat. Mm-hmm. And then I was in the postpartum, and I just was really eating convenience foods, and I did not have a good diet. And I was always physically active, but I didn't really understand how to take care of myself. So I'd never heard this concept before. And I said, no, nobody's ever said that to me. And he said, okay, well, you might want to look it up when things settle down. You might want to go. And that was the first time anyone had suggested a relationship to blindness and my gut.
Like my chills just hearing that, and just that moment of awakening to that possibility.
Oh yeah. Wow. Yeah. It was like, whew. And at the time, I just thought it was a weird suggestion. Looking back, it was the shift. It was the moment that I started to think about, like, maybe I need to think beyond my eyes, and maybe all of us need to be thinking beyond my eyes. And when an otherwise perfectly healthy woman in her late 20s suddenly goes blind, we need to think bigger picture. And until then, it just had not occurred to me. I bought into that Western idea that your eyes are over here and your feet are down here, and they're not connected, and that you go to this doctor for this and that doctor for that. And this was the first time that I thought, maybe I need to rethink my relationship to my body. So I did a bunch of research, and and again, I have an amazing community of friends and family. So I didn't do this all alone. People are sitting here going, how could she research? The answer is I couldn't. I was blind. And I had a lot of people help me with that. And I went to the doctor, and I scheduled an appointment with the doctor. And then I decided, okay, I started reading about the AIP diet, the autoimmune protocol diet. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to do this. I have nothing to lose. I'm just going to do it. And I cut gluten and dairy and soy out of my diet. I think I didn't cut out soy until later, but gluten and dairy I cut out immediately. And I had scheduled an appointment to go see a regular physician. And within 2 weeks, within 10 days, it was like, I mean, I get crazy thinking about it. Like, it was like somebody flipped a switch in my body, and I felt what it felt like to be alive inside my body for the first time. And like an entire lifetime of lethargy and sort of frustration with myself just evaporated. I had an insane amount of energy for the first time ever. And I had mental clarity for the first time ever. And, you know, my abdominal pain started to lift, everything shifted. And this, I wasn't particularly eating healthy at this point. I just stopped eating this thing that, of course, it turned out much, much later I was severely allergic to.
Wow.
And so that, you know, cutting out dairy and gluten, and I cut them out that day. It's now been nearly 8 years. I haven't touched them since. And it's hard for me even to remember the first, you know, 3 decades of my life, how tired I was and how sick I always felt, and how I had just thought of those things as normal and didn't realize that they weren't normal until they left me. And so I think of that really as the beginning of understanding that, you know, that we have this entire, and I studied science, by the way. So it was like, I didn't know this as pre-med. I didn't know this, you know, studying science. And that was really the changing point in my understanding that the physical connections between those things. But incidentally, the blood test that I took for celiac was negative. It took 5 more years before I got a positive celiac diagnosis. And
5 more years.
5 more years. And I got it on a biopsy. They eventually did a colonoscopy biopsy. And that was when they confirmed the diagnosis. But so I tell people all the time, they're like, oh, that gluten thing, they did the blood. It's like thyroid, you know, people, oh, they said my thyroid was normal. And it's like, okay, let's define normal for a minute. And let's talk a little bit about, you know, you don't have to disagree with everything your doctor says, but you have to do your homework, and you have to understand that these tests are not, you know, they're not the holy grail, and we have to think about that sort of stuff. So yeah, I came up negative on every single blood test. It wasn't until much, much later that I got a positive diagnosis, and that my kids ultimately got positive diagnosis for celiacs as well.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of that journey. And then from there, you know, from the physical standpoint, I discovered functional medicine and functional medicine practitioners, and started to move down the road of looking at the autoimmune is multifactorial, and looking at every single factor and sort of reshaping my own understanding of how to relate to my body. And I learned all kinds of important things, like that I had mold toxicity, that I tested positive for some really dangerous molds, and that I had some pretty significant polymorphism, genetic polymorphisms that significantly impair the ability of my cells to detox. And as you know this, and I'm sure many of your listeners know this, as you piece together all these different parts, okay, I've got the mold toxicity, okay, I've got the heavy metal thing, oh, look at these genetic, you know, look at these S&Ps that are telling me that actually I don't detox like a normal person. When I look at it now, it's like, well, it's kind of a miracle I didn't get sick sooner. And, you know, and it's kind of a miracle that I carried healthy pregnancies, and not kind of, it is a miracle. So that was the journey. I ultimately lost about 115 pounds. And I did not do that by trying to diet. I did that simply by just removing everything toxic. That was it. And I was not in a position to be thinking about going to Weight Watchers or going to the gym. I was blind, and I wasn't particularly graceful before. I have a friend who's blind, and he keeps winning Ironmans. And I'm like, I'm like, chill. Like, I couldn't get on a treadmill with sight. Like, just relax with your winning Ironmans. So I wasn't very good at it to begin with. So that was sort of the physical health piece. At that point, I was completely blind, and the damage was done. Sort of like the house had been set on fire and had burned down, and we needed to figure out what to do. We had been able to put out that fire, right? That inflammatory fire that was burning in my retinas and in my body. We were able, through, as I said, significant dietary and nutritional changes and lifestyle changes, and also through medicine. And people get really scared to talk about pharmaceutical medicines, and they should. They're scary, they're intense. but absolutely conventional medicine played an important role in rolling back the tide of that long enough for me to do the kind of important, the gut healing work and the detoxing work and that sort of stuff. It took another, I think 7 surgeries before they were able to restore my vision. And each one of those surgeries was, like months of preparing my body to be able to handle surgery. I went through, I think, the first 5 surgeries, and then they were able to kind of bring it back a little bit, and they were just gradually working on it, and they still are. I still have little laser procedures to clean away things every now and then. And then at the 5th surgery, right after the 5th surgery, I developed glaucoma, which is unfortunately a side effect of steroids. And I would say that probably 60% of the symptoms that I dealt with in the most recent years and now are the results of the pharmaceutical drugs that I've been on. So the original illness itself is more or less handled. And now I'm cleaning up the mess of years of terrible drugs. And this steroid, it's called steroid-induced glaucoma. And I developed that. And I went to a number of, here in New York City, we are very lucky that we can have experts at our fingertips. And I went to a number of great surgeons who all gave me like 3 months before I would be completely and irreversibly blind. So I look at that as sort of that was the scariest moment for me, because there I had already come very far. I had already been like 5 years into the journey, and I had figured out all those things, and I was seeing that, functional medicine practitioners and doing all the right things. And that moment where they were like, no, even with everything you've done, you're going to be a blind, young, single mother at that point, was probably the darkest period for me. And I was going through divorce by then. So it was all pretty scary. And then the second half of that journey, I think is the one in which I did the emotional work and where I did the spiritual work. And I did have 2 more surgeries. I did have a number of treatments using different forms of immunosuppressants and biologics. And ultimately, and I say with enormous gratitude to some really gifted and committed surgeons who refused to give up on me, and kept at it and kept taking me into the room and kept doing it. I was able to restore my sight, and I've been in remission for about 3.5 years. So I've had my vision back for 3.5 years, but I was blind for close to 3 years. I didn't see my youngest daughter's face until she was almost 4 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the shortest I've ever told that, but an overview of journey.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. What an incredible journey. And, one of the things that's really striking is your tenacity to keep, moving forward, to get a clue and to then dive in deep to research and to ask for support. So, gosh, there's so many questions I have for you, but I think the first one is, I think one of the things that my tribe struggles with is the information overload. And as they start researching all the different possible things, it's just, they're almost paralyzed, dead in their tracks. And then it becomes all the added emotions and fear-based things that come up as they research, right? There's just so many cascades of possibilities and directions you can go down, and then the advice contradicts with one another. So I'm just curious, what was your practice for cutting through that and coming back to your own trust, or, sifting through what actually was what you needed to do for your next steps?
Yeah. That's a really good question, because I think information overload is such a great description for it. And I think also when we're ill, there's a lot of well-meaning people, and unfortunately some not well-meaning people, who gravitate toward us or try to give us a lot of advice, and or have a hard time with our pain, and so want to fix us, but are can be somewhat belligerent in that. And I think it is really important to go inward, and it is really important to know what your personal radar is for true and not true with anything that's suggested to you, and to give yourself permission to say no to things that even that other people think is a good idea. I remember really, really early on in my process of healing that there was this woman who kept talking to me about turmeric. And I'd never, when you're ready, you're like, okay, turmeric, whatever. I'd never heard anything. Now I take it all the time, right? And I have like all my turmeric pastes and, and all the different things that I use. But at the time I had never heard of it. And she was, I think she was well-meaning, but she was really attached to me taking her advice, and it became really aggressive. And I think I was like the trifecta of disability. I was blind, and I had little children, and I was also physically ill. And so I felt like I was a target for other people's criticism, and I felt extremely vulnerable. And she kept, every time I would see her, which was like often for some reason, I don't know why I kept running into her, she would like yell at me about this turmeric. And I remember being like, enough with your effing turmeric. Like, I'm not taking it. Leave me alone. And it was such a strong and visceral reaction. And it was a reaction to her, not to the turmeric. But it was important. I think I say that by way of illustrating that it is important to have boundaries. And I didn't have boundaries before I got sick. And so everything felt overwhelming. And at the same time, I was terrible at asking for what I needed. And in terms of not being paralyzed and learning how to make decisions, I think the first thing that we need to do is know ourselves. And we can't know ourselves if we don't make boundaries, and we don't start to discriminate what is me and what is out there, and how do I draw walls and keep myself safe and build some integrity for myself. And once we do that, that certainly becomes it creates a way for us to make informed decisions with our own intuition. It creates like a path by which, and I literally think of it as a process, like you have like a process for taking off a plane, you have like your checklist for flying a plane. I'm saying this as if I know, as if you know. And nobody wants me. I am legally allowed to get a license, a flight license. So I'm actually going to do it.
Just because I can. Why not?
I can, because like someone who used to be blind should learn how to, I don't know. It feels very like, something to do to shake
it's like the ultimate ticket of freedom, like the
exactly.
ultimate, like.
Exactly. I met a pilot and I was like, this is what I'm going to do. Anyway, it's important to build a process by which you can say, this is who I am. This is how I know if something feels good for me. And this is how I know if something doesn't. And then it's really, really, really important to immediately and completely and never again judge yourself about the decisions that you make once you do that. And so that ability to tell that woman, no, I don't want your turmeric, even though the turmeric itself turned out to be a great thing, it was really important for me to say no. And that was part of the journey. So people are going to make all kinds of suggestions to you. If you have a chronic, well, people make all kinds of suggestions no matter what, walking down the street. But here in New York, it's just constant. But to be able to weather that with healthy boundaries, and then to just take, it's okay to not do everything. It's okay to take one thing at a time. I spent a year just not eating gluten and just learning how to breathe. And, that process where I was talking about lifting out of that fog, I was in a deep, deep postpartum depression that lasted for a really, really long time. So we can sit here and talk about the physical and everything I did all day, but the real work was in coping with that depression and in coping with what was happening for me psychologically, and putting one foot in front of the other and learning how to say things like yes to this and no to that. And it's so important to, I once heard, Cheryl Strayed, who wrote the book Wild. I don't know if you've heard of her.
No.
She's amazing. I'm going to send you the links to all her stuff. She wrote some really beautiful books that were really impactful for me on my journey. And one of my favorite lines from her is, it's amazing what becomes available to you after you learn how to survive the disappointment of saying no, or the not the disappointment for yourself, but disappointing others, learning how to say no to other people and live through their disappointment. And then what becomes available for you is that clarity about what's yes. So I don't know if that's exactly the answer, what you were looking for, but it helped me get through the overwhelm of making choices about what was right for my health.
Absolutely. And I think one of the characteristics, at least of personality, that I know for me when I was going through my debilitating health journey and struggles, and a lot of my tribe here, is that there is a little bit of almost aloofness or disconnection with our own emotion, because there's a disconnection from the body. Like you said, you learned how to relate to your body more deeply, but there's also like there's a leadership quality that almost needs to be reclaimed. And one of the things we say in the enlightened body system is like, I am the leader of my cells. That's to say, like, all of the practitioners, I love how you said, like, I didn't do this alone, right? Like I had a whole team around me, and I feel like so many of us feel isolated on this journey, but it's a merging between us taking our power back and claiming our yes, claiming our no, being the leader of our cells and our body, and also leaning in for support, but like taking the information that you gather and then using the flame of your own discernment.
Yeah.
Right? Because all the practitioners and doctors and experts that you learn from are the signposts. They're not the ones driving the car. So what I'm hearing from that journey is that was like a big kind of like you were able to reclaim your own power, so to speak, in that healing journey, and start to delineate and build your discernment in that.
Yeah. 100%. And I had lots of really well-meaning and loving and educated professionals say things to me. And I'm really glad that I was able to say, thank you so much. No.
Yeah.
And that became so powerful. And it freed up the ability for me to learn how to say yes, and learn how to invite people in to help me, and learn how to give to others, and learn how to let other people say no. And, and hear their no. We have a really hard time with that in this world, just being with no. And so it was definitely an important feature of that journey for me, 100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I know you have a hard stop time today. Maybe this is part one of, there's so much more I want to go into with you. Maybe in our next episode, we can dive into some of your personal practices around relating to your body. And I know you have a wealth of feminine wisdom that you've studied. So maybe that would be the next, our next episode. But in the meantime, what are any last words of encouragement that you'd like to share with our audience?
Last words of encouragement. Ooh. I think, I think it's really, really important to look in the mirror and love yourself. And I'll tell you one experience that I had, before we hop off. I regained my vision, and as I told you, so I had given birth and I lost about 115 pounds, and it had been about 3 years. So I had not seen anyone, including myself, in that period of time. And when I regained my vision after the surgeries, I went home and I took a shower. After, you have to wait. So I was like, gross. And it was time for me to take a shower like 48 hours later or something. And I'm in the shower, and I took the bandages off my eyes, and I get out of the shower, and I'm standing there in my towel, and I'm facing the mirror, and I look, and when you lose your vision, the cognitive connections, they decay pretty quickly. So it took me a very long time, and I actually still struggle with it. People will go, what is that? And they'll point to a car, and I'll be like, and then I'll remember it's a car. So that recognition takes a while to recover. So I'm standing there, I'm looking in the mirror, and I'm not realizing that I'm looking in a mirror, because this was right after I'd regained my vision. And I look in the mirror, and the first thought that pops into my head at that moment was, wow, look at that really beautiful woman. And just really casually off the top of my head, the way that, you know, if you're walking down the street and you saw someone in a beautiful party dress, you look really, you go, oh, she looks so pretty in your head or whatever it is. So it was that, oh, look at that pretty woman over there. Look at that beautiful woman. And then about a second later, I thought, how interesting. She looks so much like my grandmother when my grandmother was young. And then it was right after that moment that it occurred to me, I'm looking at a mirror. I'm seeing myself in the mirror. And I had never seen myself like this because I was physically transformed and I had had such a break in time. And I had this moment of realizing that I had never referred to myself as beautiful. That every moment of my life up until the point that I lost my vision was me looking in the mirror and noticing my imperfections and noticing what I needed to work on. And not nicely, not even in a nice way, not like you're doing good, but you could tone those abs a little, like it was brutal. And so having that experience really opened me up to, you know, wow, I can't believe I've never felt that feeling of self-love before. And I can't believe that I spent decades looking in the mirror and saying mean things about myself. And I have a little resolution that I carry around in my heart now that I'm not allowed to talk about myself that way anymore. And I would just go ahead and like, go get naked, look at the mirror, look at yourself in the mirror and just look at your beauty and see what's beautiful and see what the blessings are, because it's a blessing that we're able to see that, and we have to hold on to seeing that. So that would be my advice.
Wow, what a powerful story. Thank you so much for reminding us that. Everyone, I can feel that we all took that in, and that was a really potent, meaningful share. So thank you so much. Welcome back, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, so I'd love to kind of dive in. You shared so many amazing insights that you had on your journey, from self-love when you were able to open your eyes and actually see for the first time, and some of the deeper spiritual pieces on this journey of such an intense experience from so many different angles. And you really gave us a lot to think about when it comes to owning our saying no, reclaiming our power to heal, to invite others into our space. So I know that as you went through that journey, there was a lot of ups and downs on the emotional realm. So how did you navigate that? How did you deal with that when you were in your low moments? What was the perspective you brought, or what was that like?
That's a really good question. What was the perspective that I brought to the roller coaster of emotions? Making sure that I have it in my head. You know, to borrow a phrase, I took the approach of leaning in. I took the approach of leaning in. At first, I didn't, right? Because I think our natural human and very important response to pain and to trauma is to lean away, right? To pull away from that hot stove. You know, but that's not always the right course of action. Sometimes we have to lean in. Between our last interview and now, I broke my ankle. And so I'm rehabbing my ankle now, and I'm in physical therapy, and I keep being given instructions to walk on my ankle, and it hurts. It really hurts to walk on my ankle. And they keep saying, you know, you have to do it. You have to keep walking. And, you know, this is an important part of the process of regaining function. And my physical therapist keeps saying to me, you know, pain is not always an indication of damage. And that like immediately I was like, right. Yeah, because we do need reminders, right? Even though I've been through these like enormous traumas, I still need those reminders. And hearing that sentence, pain is not always an indication of damage, is such a profound sentence. And I think that was often in my heart at that point. Pain is sometimes the result of healing, and sometimes the result of just going through a process that's ultimately a really good thing, a really positive thing. So I had a shift, and it was very conscious. This wasn't accidental or metaphorical. Like, this was I had a tremendous amount of physical pain, in addition to the psychological pain. And I thought, okay, how am I going to, what's my relationship to this pain going to be? It's here with me, like my child or like a spouse. What's my relationship to the pain going to be? And I decided I'm going to be welcome to it. And I'm going to give it space. And I'm going to see what happens if I just make the space around the pain bigger and just let it live there with me. I didn't have a choice. I call those choiceless choices, right? I didn't have the choice. So I only had the choice to either resist it or not resist it. Mm-hmm. And learning pain does not always equal damage. And I can just lean in and breathe a lot. And that started with how I dealt with the physical pain and deal with it when it happens, less frequently, but it does occasionally happen. And then it became how I dealt with the emotional pain and with the psychological pain and with the spiritual pain, which was that same, like, what if I can have this pain and also be here in it? This kind of duality, this idea of holding two different ideas in our head at the same time. Or like, I don't want to be sick and also I'm sick. Both things can be true. And sometimes we have it like it can only be that I don't want to be sick. And it can't be like I am sick and I don't want to be sick. And also I'm here. And what does it look like to cultivate presence in this space, physically and psychologically? What does it look like to embrace the being that I am right now, even if that's not the being that I wish to be ultimately, either physically or emotionally? So a lot of embrace and a lot of learning how to make room for it. And it's still every day, working on it every day, making room for it.
Wow. So that's just such a profound answer to that. Thank you. And, I think a lot of my listeners, as well as students in the Enlightened Body System, one of the main things is transforming our relationship with, like, most people don't even realize they have a choice, is what I'm getting at. They don't realize they have a choice to be in relationship with their body, let alone pain, because the pain is the thing that we contract away from, that it's just a knee-jerk reaction to run away from it. So it takes a lot of presence and awareness and really a commitment to enter into, a more conscious relationship with that. So, wow. Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And what does that look like in practice, when it comes to embracing that pain? Or, you kind of alluded to it, but do you have any specific kind of examples in terms of maybe your journey with healing your eyes? What did that look like? And what even brought that into your awareness that you had the choice to do that?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. So what brought it into my awareness? I grew up, I had my father, members of my family, my entire family is religious. They've all...
Hold on, there's something with your microphone.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it sounded like something was wiping past the mic. No?
Are we good? No, I'm good here.
We're good now. Okay. Just start that. Yeah, just start that over.
Okay. So in answering your second question first, the question of what gave me the understanding that I had a choice, I think that had a lot to do with my upbringing. I was raised in a religious environment, and on one side of my family were a very Orthodox sect of Jews, and there were also Catholics in my family, and also there was a couple of my family members studied Buddhism for a while. So I had a lot of different, I was raised in this really like intellectual, theological kind of environment. And the idea that we have, we can have both a personal experience of the world and also a kind of observation style. Like, we can leave ourselves in a way and step back and observe ourselves interacting with the world. And we can ask ourselves, in a kind of third person way. Who is she, right? Like, who is she who's out there living and having relationships and doing and saying? So I'd been raised in a dialogue of self-reflection, and raised in a dialogue of that we have choice about not only our action, but our relationship to our thoughts and feelings and experiences. So that space I knew it existed. The word that I think best describes it is that liminal space. I think of it as the hallway. There's who we are, and then our circumstances, and then our reaction to those circumstances. And there's this hallway in between ourselves and our reaction. And most of us go through life not conscious of that hallway. And I used to call it, when I was very, very sick, I would call it, it's the hallway without chairs. And because it's the room that you just cannot ever be comfortable in. And after a while of being in that space, I realized this is not the destination. This space of discomfort cannot possibly be my destination. This must be the space that I have to pass through to get to that destination. And I get to choose how I relate to the circumstances while I'm in it. And so, that opened up that space for me. And then I was able in that space to reflect and to start to think about, okay, who do I want to be in the matter of this illness or in the matter of this experience? And it's usually not simple, right? Like, if it was just like, oh, I cut my arm, who am I in the matter of my arm injury? Then we're like, I am strong and responsible and a person with a first aid kit, right? Like, it's very simple when we do it that way, but it's generally not that. It's, who am I in the face of this pain that I may or may not understand what that pain is, the source of it is biologically, right, mechanistically. I may not know where it's coming from. I may not even have people in my life who can answer that question. And in addition to that pain, I am in relationship. I'm a mother, or I'm a spouse, or what I'm accountable to my job, whatever it is, right? So it's usually very complex. So when we're figuring out who are we in the matter of our pain, what we're really saying is, who are we in the matter of a life that we don't control and fully understand? And it's much bigger than, it's very easy to be courageous about one surgery. It's a very different thing to be courageous about one surgery in the midst of being a parent and trying to love someone in a partnership. Because that's the good stuff, right? That's like where it gets really terrifying. That's where it's scary as hell. And you're like, I'll just take the surgery over figuring out how to love inside that space. So I think your first question was, what are some of the practices?
Yeah.
So, most of them, I had trouble. I don't know if other people had trouble with this. I had trouble remembering that I'm a human body, that I'm like a physical creature. And I sound like a rabbit when I talk about it. I'm remembering I'm a rabbit in a garden. I am one of those people who just wanted to leave. Like, when I experienced a tremendous amount of physical pain, I was like, cool, y'all, I'm out. I'm hopping the next spaceship out of town. I don't want to experience this physical pain. I don't want to be in this world that I don't excuse me, understand and control.
Yeah, I hear that. Been there.
And so I think a lot of people's practices, a lot of people's practices are about sort of connecting in higher ways. And my practice ended up being the reverse. I don't know. It's very dry in this room. Sorry. Excuse me.
No, it's okay. Go for it. Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear more about your spiritual journey with that, and just how it sounds like you've had a lot of wonderful influences growing up. And I think some of our audience, like some of you listening, have had that foundation and are looking how to weave that into your physical experience and your physical health and how that relates. But I think there's also, some of you listening to this may, be totally like light bulb moment just to think that, oh, we have an opportunity to, I think you said, to be not just in a personal relationship with life, but also to realize that we can be an observational. We can have that power to be the witness or the observer of what's happening, and not that it's all happening to me. And
Yeah.
so, anything else that you want to, I'd love to dive into the spiritual on that.
Yeah. Well, and I think from the perspective of practices, I think the first step is saying, like, I am the source of my experience of my life. And that's that first really important sentence. Like, I have a say in how I experience it. And not only do I have a say, but I actually get to say, like, I am the source. I get to define what my life looks like. I get to define my experience of what's happening to me and my relationships. And so my job with myself was to be anchored in the world, was to stop trying to, like, just take off, and just like not be here. So I did a lot of, like, being in nature, and I developed a lot of practices that had to do with spending a tremendous amount of time in nature and a tremendous amount of time outdoors, and really being intentional about what the committee in my head was doing in those spaces. And I realized that I had to give a certain amount of time each day. I just discussed this with someone yesterday. It takes approximately 3 hours for my mind to run its course. The newsreel. And then after 3 hours, it starts to quiet. And then I can be kind of an observer of myself. And I've heard this metaphor that, our thoughts are the clouds, but we're the blue sky. And the blue sky is always there. Sometimes it's all clouds, but there's still always blue sky.
Yeah.
And I heard that said, and I just thought that was so profound.
I love that analogy.
Yeah. And so I started to cultivate practices that got me to remembering that I'm the blue sky, to spending a lot of time in nature. I'm a really physical person, so doing a lot of running and a lot of biking and swimming, anything I can do. And I just want to put here the caveat, I live in New York City. So anyone listening to this who's like, I don't have access to nature, like, you do, okay? I don't have, like, you have access to nature. There is a tree somewhere. Go find it. Go hug it. Go lay in the grass on your lawn or on your neighbor's lawn if you don't have a lawn, or if their lawn is better. Go, like, whatever it is that roots you to the earth, I think is a really powerful experience. Like, really giving some respect to gravity. We're here on earth. And then, whatever I could do to support that for myself. So that, a yoga practice, a meditation practice, reading things that I felt, were honest and had integrity and really moved me. And also, I think when we get into these spaces, we can enter worlds that feel very open, but actually are totally out of integrity, right? There's a lot of, like, sort of spaces. You can go to this event or that event or this healing ceremony or that healing ceremony. And there's actually, like, there's a lot of people in pain creating these spaces, and they don't always all have a great deal of integrity and authenticity to them. And they're not always, so it's really important when you're going and seeking out community and seeking out how to ground yourself in the world, that you have a sense of who you are and where your lines are. And for me, I made a practice. I spent about 4 months in the inquiry of what are my values? What is my personal moral system? And I really wanted to answer this for myself. And I actually put together a whole exercise for myself, and then took myself through it, wrote a whole system, shared it with a couple friends, and arrived at a place of having a mission statement and a set of values, and got into the habit of reading them to myself every morning. And then every night, and then asking myself, okay, does my life reflect these values? Do the people in my life reflect these values? Are the choices I'm making in integrity with the person that I say that I am? And that ranges from, like, do I want to drink this thing that, let's say, had a bunch of sugar in it or something, to, like, do I want to go to that concert, or do I want to date that person? And it gets easier and easier to answer those questions when we really know who we are and we're really grounded. And then that's how we protect ourselves while we're going through the healing.
I love, love, love that you're bringing this up, because it is very easy to get lost in that world of, wounded healers bringing offerings, and they're all on their path, right? Everyone's well-meaning, but there's yeah, I don't need to say any more about that. You touched on that. I'm just glad that you brought that up, because it all points back to our own sovereign connection with ourself, the groundedness. I love how you said the respect for gravity, right? In terms of nature. But I'm really curious. I love and have so much respect that you took time to take the inventory for your personal values and moral systems. I feel like many people listening may have that established, but when we're struggling with our health and with chronic illness, we can get taken out in the swirl and lose touch with what's most important, because it becomes about surviving and just trying to get back to a baseline. And it's almost like what you're talking about is something that people would do to try to ascend to like a level of thriving, not just getting back to a baseline. And so this is like at the crux of what I like to talk about, is not just it's the vision, but it's our spiritual connection, or it's a connection to something greater than ourselves. And it creates this like North Star that will guide us back to ourselves, back to home. And so if you want to offer any more, I love that you created like a whole practice. I'd love to go through your practice. But if you want to just maybe offer a couple little nuggets of, what are some of the things, like when you take inventory as like an actual practice where someone could sit down and say, I'm going to just sit with my journal and I'm going to write and reflect on some of these questions so I can start getting clear on my personal moral system.
I think some of the questions that we got to ask ourselves, I started this in a space of outrage. I started this practice in a space of outrage. I had been in a situation where I had been betrayed. And so I was feeling this extraordinary sense of outrage. And I thought to myself, how do I get through this? What does this mean about me? Because, when things like that happen, we sort of go into a tailspin. We make up a lot of stories about ourselves. And then I realized who I am is the opposite of the outrage. Right? So I did that thing where I pulled myself back into that third dimension, and I thought, well, who am I in relationship to what just happened? Because what just happened is a set of circumstances. It is, it is what it is. But who am I in relationship to that? What is my response to that? And I found that the answer is the opposite of the experience, right? So I experienced betrayal. My outrage was the indication that who I am is the opposite of that betrayal. I'm a very loyal person. And that was it was the first word that I came up with out of that scenario. I was like, oh, I'm loyal. I'm trustworthy. So when I encounter disloyalty, when I encounter someone who isn't trustworthy, or a situation that's not trustworthy, it provokes rage in me, right? Like at the low level, it provokes discomfort, distrust. But at the high level, when it's a very personal, traumatic situation, it's rage. And that rage was like, we relate to our rage like it's a bad thing. And it's like, I'm such a big fan of listening to that. Like that rage is the smoke alarm. Like your smoke alarm is going off. And our smoke alarm goes off throughout our life. And we always relate to it like, oh, it's just toast that burnt. When my smoke alarm goes off constantly. I have kids. I don't know what we're doing in there. It's like, and so none of us take it seriously. It's like, oh, we set something on fire again, whatever. But it's like sometimes that smoke alarm is telling you need to get the hell out of the house. Like sometimes you got to listen to that. And rage is that smoke alarm. Rage is you saying, no, you just encountered something that is in true and profound opposition to who you are as a soul and a human being. Listen to that. Learn from that. And so that first indication of who you are as a person, or your set of values, or your moral compass, whatever you want to call it, is what enrages me, because I'm going to find the truth on the other side of that. If injustice rages me, then justice is something that's very important to me. Mm-hmm. Let me make sure I live a life that really is integrity with justice. Or for me, let me make sure I live a life that's really in integrity with trust and loyalty. And that's really hard, by the way, because, the first thing I think is, well, I'm only going to hang out with people who are trustworthy. And then, of course, what do? I do what everybody does, which is I trust no one. Because that's how we cope with betrayal is, well, I shall trust no one. And this way I will never experience that again. But we can't do that. We can't become bitter. We can't become jaded about the possibility of humans being wonderful. So we have to learn how to trust in a space of knowing that not everyone shares that value. And so my first piece of advice is look at what you're angry about, especially as women, because God, we just love to make our anger wrong. And we'd love to make it quiet, and like, look at your anger and figure out what you're angry about and figure out what's under that and what is that smoke alarm telling you. And then from there, it becomes an exercise in just saying, who do I admire and why do I admire them? Who do I not respect and why don't I respect them? We have to be able to go further than our initial emotional response in engaging with ourselves and engaging with the world. And this is something that, like, everyone who has Facebook and posts on Facebook about political things, I would say, like, we have to be able to go further than our initial emotional response to anything. We have to be able to ask why of ourselves so that we can hold the space for a dialogue about ideas and a dialogue about values instead of just a dialogue about who's hurt and who's not hurt. So I just took it from the very personal to the very global, which I tend to do.
That's great.
Not there, but that's
it's a great translation. And I'll also just share from my own healing journey what came up for me while you were sharing that is I find at times where my rage, you use that as one emotional provocation, right, that we can learn about. All kinds of emotions we can dig deeper and learn about. But there are times where I've been able to discern where the rage that I felt inside was actually not by the circumstance, but was by something old inside of me that I was projecting onto circumstance, like a partnership. And like for me personally, I've done a lot of healing because I suffered sexual abuse when I was a kid. So I had this like cellular memory that it would jog and get triggered by like my intimate partnership. And like, I would feel this unnecessary, unwarranted rage towards the person. So I think that, that like absolutely taking the space to go deeper and owning like, hey, this is a line in the sand that I'm drawing when it comes to the people I'm choosing to surround myself with, when there's obvious betrayal or disloyalty, things like that. And where have I disowned something inside of myself that I need to hold, to heal, and to move through deeper layers of, so I'm not projecting that outside. But the emotion itself is not, isn't right. It as a society, especially as women, like you said, we have a tendency to make pretty much all of our emotions wrong and stop them, right? So anger, or even sadness, or despair, or hopelessness, right? Like people don't know how to deal with hopelessness, desire, right? They're all like, everything is supposed to be tamed, and that just creates repression in our whole being. So yeah, I love that you're bringing in this piece. And it's, one of my teachers used to say, anytime you feel, something towards the outside, it's like one finger's pointing out, but one has to be pointing in. So you're always balancing the, like, what's mine to own and where are the new choices or the new standards that I have for my life. Like,
and it's such a balance, because on the one hand, you got to be in the inquiry, right? Like, when you're coming from illness or past trauma or whatever it is, it's this evolving process of relearning how to live in the world, right? Relearning how to read people. And because for those who've experienced abuse at a very young age, our whole reading of everybody is off. And so that, it's like, you're like, okay, I didn't grow up with humans, and now I'm with humans, I have to figure out how to read them. Like, that's sort of so relearning that, but also trusting yourself at the same time. So like, not necessarily trusting those first projection trigger things, but also trusting them. So it's such a balance of, how do I do that? Like, I know I'm someone who can react strongly to a trigger, right? I also know I'm someone who is a very good judge of people and has a great sense of intuition. And I'm going to respect that about myself. And I don't always need to have an intellectual explanation for an emotional experience. And I can, work on honoring both things. So it's tough.
Well, I think that's part of the journey of discernment. The more we practice that, and the more we at least instead of just recoiling away from whatever the thing is that's uncomfortable, whether it's
Yeah.
the physical pain or the emotional pain, and we allow ourselves the space, like you mentioned, to just let it breathe and to be, and then to observe it.
Yeah.
Where our discernment gets sharper, and that's how we develop the wisdom to make those
Yeah.
choices and to trust ourselves more and more and more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when it comes to, you also have, and I know we're kind of getting close to our time here, but I wanted to tap into a little bit of just some of the feminine wisdom on your path. And you have a lot of background in studying. I don't know exactly what it was that you studied, so please let me know that. But I know you have like a deep, both academic background in women,
Yeah. Yeah.
and also just your own journey as a ever evolving, discerning, wise woman, as you know, with all of the things that we're talking about now. So what would be relevant to this conversation? What would you like to share with this audience around your personal journey and just embracing us in female bodies, and, you know, being able to heal and to connect either with ourselves as women, or there might be men on this call, right, that are like wanting to be able to interact with women in a healthier way, or the feminine aspect of themselves.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I don't have that question answered. And I do. And I did study it. I studied feminist political theory, a degree in that, and a degree in reproductive health and human sexuality. Mm-hmm. So I do have an extensive background in that, mostly because I was trying to answer this question, right? So I'm like, I'll just study this forever, read everything. And I didn't get it answered. And I think about it a lot. I think about it for myself, and I think about it because I'm the mother of daughters. Where I happen to be, I have a daughter who will be 12 at the end of this year. And she is, we're in the Jewish tradition, she's going to have a bat mitzvah, which is sort of a marking of a milestone at the age of 12, sort of leaving girlhood and entering some little amorphous place in between girlhood and adulthood that she calls tweenhood. Not the most spiritual word for it. And we're learning, it's a custom to prepare to learn in advance of that. And I have been really thinking about, what does it look like to prepare my daughter for being a woman in our world? And how do I answer that without being really bleak, right? How do I give her a sense of hope and a sense of independence and safety in a world that can feel really unsafe? And, you know, in my bleaker moments that I just think of as a predatory patriarchy, right? So I don't know that I have an answer to this question. I can say that I wrestle with it every day. And there's, and I say this for men and women, because I you know, I really love men, and I feel a lot of responsibility as a woman toward men, in the sense that we're all in this together, and there are a lot of our values are universal values, not gendered values. And grace and forgiveness and compassion and presence is a gift that we can give anyone, you know, regardless of anything. And it's not a gift freely given in the current situation, right? We don't live in a culture that encourages that way being. I can say that there are basics, right? Like, learn how to look in the mirror and love yourself. And learn it hard and spend the rest of your damn life struggling with it. Because the minute you figure it out, you're going to age a little, and then you're gonna have some new reckoning with that. And that, you know, that's one that I really struggle with. I have my younger daughter loves my belly. She loves my stomach. And us women, God, we're like just merciless about these stomachs. We're just so mean about our stomachs. And she comes over and she squishes it and she makes noises. She squeezes it and she loves to like make noises and play with that. And I just, it's like a feminist revival in my head every time she's doing it. I'm in my head like in a tent, and I have to just let her, and I have to enjoy the experience of her adoration for my body. And she loves it. She rubs my tummy and she goes, "This is my first home." You know, she has this extraordinary relationship to my body. Who am I to not create space for that? Who am I to say, "No, you're wrong. This is terrible. This is a terrible part of me." So I think loving ourselves, if we can do it for ourselves, my God, we should. But we really need to do it for our children. And, you know, we cannot pass it on. We might not be able to heal it in ourselves, but we cannot pass it on. That's just inexcusable. And we have to do that work. And so I would tell everyone, man and woman, like, love yourself. Cheryl Strayed wrote a beautiful essay about learning to love the beast in us, right? And I think that that's a really key part of it. I think the other thing is, you know, to stay curious and to keep yourself removed as much as you can from the world, you know, from things like media. And it's toxic. It's wholesale toxic. And I think people are like, well, only the mainstream media is toxic, you know, but I listen to this other form of media, or I watch these like woke commercials, or I just read a magazine this morning, which is a very feminist, third wave feminist publication. And it was a little bit, you're going to put this on the internet, so I have to be careful what I say, but like, you know, it was, there were parts of it that I was like, no, you guys, we're just having the same conversation framed a different way. And let's not do that. Let's just completely dismantle this conversation altogether and have a completely different relationship. You know, and I can only talk about it from my perspective. There's myriad voices and opinions and perspectives out there in the world, but I do think we need to not constantly repackage the same thing and call it profound. I think it's really important to be skeptical of that. You know, the representation of women in media is the representation of women in media, whether it's slightly more progressive or slightly less progressive. We have to continue to remain inquisitive and one step ahead of anything that objectifies any human in any way. And that's really hard to do in reality. Like it's aspirational. I say it from an aspirational place, not from a practical place. But, you know, it's something that I hope to impart to my kids every time here in New York City, at every billboard and every, you know, every street sign and every store. It's just everywhere. Representations of how humans ought to be is everywhere. As those representations move from completely, you know, exploitive into inclusive, so that's fantastic. You know, that's a direction we need to be moving in inclusiveness, but it's still a representation. It's not a reality. And we still need to have that space and remain inquisitive. Why is that image there? What is that image attempting to accomplish with me? So I think media is something I'm going to talk a lot about with my children as they get older. What does it mean to be a woman in the face of all that? I think I had another point, but I lost it.
Okay. No, this is great. I can pick something up here as we're kind of wrapping up is, you know, when you're talking about the media and all of these outside influences, to me, part of what I'm hearing is like, they're all ploys to take us away from who we are. And when we're in a healing journey, we're also bombarded with tons of information, right? Tons of people saying, you should try this and you should do that. And here's the miracle cure. And this is like all the thing you need. And so they're all things that pull us away from ourselves. Yeah. So I feel like one of the biggest take homes from this conversation with you is really coming back to yourself, your morals, your values, your spiritual journey, how you're choosing to relate to what's happening. And I'm wondering if you might share kind of as a closing thought here, just your beliefs around the spiritual journey and its importance when it comes to healing your relationship with your body.
Yeah. I think it's important to disengage. I think was the word that I was looking for. It's important to have that distance, to put that hallway between you and your interaction with the world and your experience of the world. And and it's not always from behind enemy lines. Like sometimes it's your, sometimes that stuff is right up close, and we do need to create space for it, distance from it. Ask me the last question again. I'm sorry. I lost it.
So it's just more, I don't remember the specific words, but the importance of the spiritual journey when you're on a physical healing journey.
Yeah. I believe, and I, with respect for whatever anyone else believes, so this is just for me, I believe that we are souls, that we are spiritual beings inside physical bodies. And I don't think we're more soul than we're body. I don't think we're more body than we're soul. I think that we're both.
Yeah.
And finding that marriage, finding that unification inside of ourselves, and allowing for both, allowing for the voice of our body and our soul. And you talked a little bit before about like that, abuse is in all our cells. Like our cells bear the imprint of our souls, and our soul carries the wounds of our cells. So it's such an interconnected relationship. And I don't know how to strike that balance. It's a balance that I work on striking on a daily basis, being both a soul and a human in the world. Sometimes I'm really awesome at it, sometimes less so. And it's a work in progress, but every aspect of us needs that nurturing and needs that love. We got to look in the mirror and love ourselves and our body. We got to lean into our pain and create that space for it physically. And then we got to go lay in nature and remember that we're a blue sky, and remember that we can step away from this experience in this moment, and we can have intention as a soul, who we are for ourselves, who we are in the world. And it's a work of a lifetime. So good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck to all of us.
Thank you so much. Wow, what a blessing to have you here today. Thank you all who tuned in to listen to this conversation. We'd love to hear your feedback and your comments below this video. What stood out for you? What questions do you have around this conversation? And thank you, Jennifer, Ellie, for sharing with us. And what is the best way that people can connect with you?
At this point, anyone who comes through your program, I would say you can give them my email address. They can email me directly. I'm also on Twitter at This is Elisheva, ELISHEVA. This is Elisheva. Those are the best ways to reach me now. I'm working on a book and building a website, so I will share those links with you as soon as they're up. And certainly anyone who's listening to this is welcome to reach out and connect. And they can post comments under, I'll check them out there too.
Great. We'll both be on the thread to respond to your comments. So thank you so much. Have a beautiful day. And until next time, lots of love. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today, my friend. It was a pleasure to have you. We both look forward to reading your comments below this video. Also, make sure that you head over to my website, alicialyndiaz.com, to get some free gifts and free trainings on the enlightened body. And make sure you also like and subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notifications so that you don't miss any of the inspiring healing stories and health education to help you live your most thriving and healthy, vibrant existence. So until the next episode, have a beautiful, beautiful day, and I'll see you soon.